Okay.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Stetson University College of Law Project for Excellence in Legal Communication, our webinar on diversity in the legal writing classroom. My name is Jason Palmer, and I'm going to be the organizer. Before we get started, let me just show you. Let's see. Here I am as your organizer, and I just want to make sure that everyone can hear us before we get started. So let me just go to testing your Q&A boxes. If everyone can look on the right side, they should see that they have a Q&A box in there, or question box where it says questions. If everyone could just type in hello, or I'm here, or good afternoon, something so I can see pop up in your question box, that would be great, just to make sure that you're all hearing me. Good. I see hello from Sue. Hi, Jason from Lance. Great. Getting some there. Getting some more. Just want to make sure we're getting people in. People can hear you fine. Hi. Good. Excellent. Good. Glad everything's working well. All right. Well, let me just briefly, as the organizer, walk you through some of the webinar attendee interfaces in case it's new for anyone here. The interface is made up of two parts. And the first part, let's see, get to the next screen. Sorry, my computer seems to want to be a little slow today. Here we go. Okay, so we got the interface right here. So let me walk through some of the two parts here. The first part is the viewer window, which hopefully you can see I'm moving my mouse right now. This is the viewer window right here, which is the first part. And on the first part of this, you can resize it by dragging and clicking it in the lower corners right here if you want to drag it or click it. So there's the window, big nice red arrow showing the viewer window. Over here is your control panel. And on the control panel, there are various functions I want to make you aware of. The first thing, hopefully, is the audio mode, and you can see that you can come in using a telephone or using the mic and speakers. The next thing is, and if you do that, if you want to, you see you're muted right now, but if you want to adjust anything, you can adjust your volume, can make your volume, if you're having trouble hearing, louder. The next thing I want to show you is where this arrow is. This is a little device that lets you control your panel. It opens and closes it. So if you want to close your control panel, make it minimize off your screen, you can click on that. Click on it again, it'll open this control panel back up again. Just like that. Opens, and you'll have this. That's all that's left there. And then when you click on it again, it opens it back up just like that. All right. Audio setup, as I mentioned, is right here. If you're having any trouble with your audio, go ahead and click on audio setup, and you'll be able to look at your audio. Okay, next thing we have going on is the question box. As I said, all of you have already typed in the questions log and said hello to us, but hopefully as we go through our webinar, if you have any questions for our panelists, please feel free to type in your questions here for our panelists, and during the question and answer session at the end, we will go ahead and ask those questions to our panelists. Right there. All right. And the last thing on the control panel is right up here at the view. If you click on view up here, you will see this pop-up box come up. And right here, auto hide the control panel. If you have that ticked off, your control panel may automatically hide itself at one point. So if you want to keep your control panel visible the whole time, go ahead and just click that off, untick it, and that'll keep your control panel from hiding itself. All right. Our webinars are available for replay. Just wanted to let you know that. If anyone wants to hear the webinar again, it is free for nonprofit, governmental, and educational institutional members. So you can go to our website, which is on the screen, www.law.stetson.edu, academics/LRW, and then /webinars.php. And that will allow you to hear the webinar again anytime you'd like. We also have available there our previous webinars. So if you've missed any of our previous webinars, feel free to go to our website there and listen to the previous webinars. And then finally, just to let you know, we have an upcoming webinar scheduled in January 2012, and more information will be coming shortly on this webinar, and that's going to be Keeping Current in Composition Theory. And we're looking forward to that webinar, and there'll be more details coming shortly on that webinar. So with that, I'm now going to turn this over to our I'm going to turn this over to our moderator now, Linda Anderson. Let me go ahead and share my screen with her now so she can take over, and she will continue as the moderator for our panel. And let me also unmute.
Thank you, Jason. I think you've unmuted me now, so I'm hoping that everyone can hear me. And it's going to take me just a moment to get the PowerPoint in the right place, because there we go. So I want to welcome you as well. My name is Linda Anderson, and I'm also here at Stetson with Jason. Our topic today is diversity in the legal writing classroom, moving toward more inclusiveness. And we decided on this topic because we recognized that all of us understand the importance of incorporating diversity issues into our classroom, but determining how to do so, how to address resistance or discomfort about doing so, how to encourage other people to do so, that's not necessarily something that comes easily or automatically to many of us. So we figured that maybe this would be a relevant topic to think about, especially as we begin to think about the upcoming semester, even as we finish up this one. It also may not be as easy for some of us who don't consider ourselves members of a group that might be underrepresented in classrooms. So that's another aspect to this whole discussion about diversity, is the fact that many of us might not actually identify as a group that might consider themselves in a minority in a classroom or having different viewpoints. And over the past several years, a few of us here at Stetson have spent some time talking about this issue with students who feel isolated from the rest of the class because of the discussions in the class, or the materials used to teach the class, or the perspectives addressed in the class that don't actually include their own social or cultural experiences. So as a result of these conversations with the students and among some of the faculty here, we recognized that this would be an appropriate topic to think about more explicitly and deliberately talking about diversity and incorporating it into our particular classroom. In addition to this webinar and numerous presentations at past and future workshops and conferences, the theme for the upcoming edition of the second draft is diversity in the classroom as well. So we can look forward to continued conversations about this topic as we see that publication finding its way to our inboxes. But let me move on. I'd like to introduce our panelists today. And both panelists today have taught both legal writing and casebook courses. So let me start with Kim Chambonpin, who is an assistant professor of law at the John Marshall Law School in Chicago, where she joined the faculty there in 2008. Kim teaches lawyering skills, criminal law, torts, and national security law, and her scholarly writing considers redress and reparations law, policy, and social movements in the United States. In a 2011 article, she actually proposed an inclusive model for social hearing, a new paradigm for understanding reparations projects. So in addition to thinking about some of the issues we're talking about today and legal writing, she has some interest in other areas, as does our other panelists, who you'll hear about in just a moment. And in addition, the reason that we invited Kim to join us today is as part of last year's one-day legal writing workshops, she put together a document titled Tips for Crafting Writing Assignments. Integrating Diversity Issues in the Classroom and Creating Culturally Competent Lawyers. So that's Kim Chan Bonpin, and I'm also going to introduce Joanna Dennis, who is an associate professor of law at Southern University Law Center in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where she teaches immigration law, commercial paper, and patent law. Prior to joining the faculty at Southern University Law Center, Joanna taught at several other law schools in a variety of areas, including legal writing, environmental law, and law and medicine topics. Joanna has written, published, and presented articles in patent law, immigration law, multiculturalism, and legal writing skills and pedagogy. And her research interests include biotech law and patent law, teaching methodologies and pedagogy, immigration and nationality law, food and drug law. So as you can see, both of these folks have a variety of interests, including legal writing. So the reason that the article that caught our attention for this panel from Joanna was one titled Ensuring a Multicultural Educational Experience in Legal Education. Start with the Legal Writing Classroom. So in a moment, I'm going to turn this over to our panelists. And as we do so, I want to remind everyone, I think Jason mentioned this already, but remind everyone to submit questions as we go along. I will gather them. I will try to ask as many of them to our panelists at the end of the presentation as we have time for, but you don't have to wait until the end to ask your questions. So you can just type them into that box, and we will begin to keep track. So Jason, if you can help me transfer this back to our panelists, I think we're ready to get going.
Joanna, can you hear me?
Yep, I hear you.
Okay, and you have the screen?
All right.
I see diversity in the legal writing classroom. You are good to go.
Hello?
Joanna?
Can you hear me?
Yep. Kim, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I was just wondering if you can hear me.
I hear you fine.
Okay, wonderful. So let's just begin. And I just want to first thank Jason, Linda, Kristen, and the Stetson University College of Law for inviting me to speak on this topic, diversity in the legal writing classroom. And, you know, I think at the beginning, although Linda sort of mentioned that, you know, I think there's general agreement that trying to incorporate diversity and multicultural topics into the legal classroom is a worthy endeavor, I think we might as well also, you know, spend some time at the outset of the webinar considering the why question really explicitly. Because I think being explicit about the goals regarding these particular curricular choices makes sense and will go a long way in helping to answer the other issues that we'll be raising today, namely promoting inclusive curricular practices to other faculty members, dealing with student resistance, and the nitty-gritty stuff, the how-to stuff, the mechanics of actually incorporating diversity into the legal writing classroom. So to begin with, why should legal writing faculty incorporate diversity issues and multicultural topics into their classes? I think we can frame the response to this question in probably a number of different ways. First, you know, we might take what I might call a law and economics approach. For example, we should integrate diversity issues into the legal writing classroom and create culturally competent lawyers because the market demands it. You know, in this vein, the United States is an increasingly pluralistic society where clients come from a variety of different cultural backgrounds. So lawyers need to have the cultural and social competence skills to be able to effectively communicate with individuals who come from different backgrounds, including different racial and ethnic and socioeconomic backgrounds. And cultural competence requires an ability to read a given situation, to understand it, and to navigate any potential minefields with critical thinking and problem-solving skills nurtured in a multicultural environment. So as Charles Calleros has suggested, immersing students in legal writing assignments
that directly confront issues of diversity provides an opportunity to broaden their social, cultural, and intellectual perspective and encourages development of creative problem-solving skills to serve the diverse needs of our clientele. A second frame that we could use is the liberal equality approach. In other words, when classroom projects are typically constructed around presumptively normal or normative cast of characters, or when the cultural differences of these characters are absent or flattened, legal writing teachers should make efforts to provide equal time to including characters from diverse backgrounds or to including legal issues that are marked as diverse or, multicultural. This is sort of the fair and balanced approach to organizing your syllabus and course materials, making a deliberate effort then to use names coded as maybe ethnic is an effective way of sharing classroom space. Crafting problems around contemporary social legal issues such as immigration or poverty and discrimination is a way to address more directly conversations that might not otherwise occur in the classroom. A third way of framing the choice to include diversity is in terms of a curricular, a goals-oriented learning outcomes approach. This may overlap a little bit with a market-based approach as it concerns providing our students with a defined skill set that they will be able to carry with them into the practice of law. So in addition to the basic research and writing skills taught, we want our students to enter the legal profession with a level of cultural competence and emotional intelligence that was developed in the controlled atmosphere of our legal writing classroom. So under this curricular approach, it's part of our responsibility as law teachers to prepare our students to know how to interact with a diverse group of actors in our legal system, clients, advocates, judges, et cetera, especially when those individual actors may have a completely different worldview than our students, and perhaps and probably as a result of their lived experience as members of different groups. And so the three theoretical frameworks that I've just described I don't think are any more valid than the others, but I want to share my own thinking about my reasons for participating in diversity work in the legal writing community. And in sort of reflecting on my own work and my own process, I've begun to frame my own method in terms of anti-subordination. And what I mean by that is that my view is that the exclusion of certain voices, perspectives, and lived experience from the law school classroom, it's not accidental. It may not be intentional, but the silencing of outsider voices is the material result of institutions of power exerting their influence to control and maintain a certain status quo. And whether this is incidental or intentional doesn't matter so much as the fact that it exists. And the power of the status quo, after all, is that it appears so natural. So therefore, to effect change means to consciously and deliberately engage in actions to counter the status quo. For me, in my classroom, this means clearing a space where outsider voices can not only participate, but also gain a foothold from where to build and expand the influence of certain politics committed to inclusion and to justice. And what taking an anti-subordination approach also means is crafting a much broader concept of what we mean by diversity. So when I reference diversity in this webinar, what I'm going to mean is not only race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, but also sort of other classes that may not come, to mind immediately, such as age, class, religion, and other identity aspects that don't fit into an identity norm. And that is sort of the white, heterosexual, Christian, middle-class male identity that exists as the norm in this country. So, diversity and diversity issues to me may include a discussion of a gay, white, working-class male, as well as a Latina judge who is unmarried and childless. So in I just wanted to take that time to frame the discussion. And if, Joanna, we could skip to the next slide.
Sure.
What we're going to address, what Joanna and I are going to address today in the context of that framework are specific sort of ideas about how to promote, among other faculty members, the practice of teaching in a more explicitly inclusive manner, how to address student resistance and sensitive topics, and how to successfully incorporate diversity issues and discussion into your course. And I'm going to turn over the talk for the next portion to Joanna, who's going to talk about promoting the idea of inclusion among other faculty members.
Thank you, Kim. I also want to thank Stetson and Jason and Linda and Kirsten for inviting me to participate in this. It's a very timely and substantial and important issue as well, and I echo everything that Kim has said about the need to incorporate multicultural issues and be cognizant of multiculturalism in our teaching. And so focusing in on promoting a faculty culture of inclusiveness, having taught at, now this is my fourth institution, I can definitely say that one of the most important things is to really know the political arena of the law school where you teach, because it's of no consequence and very frustrating, if you can imagine, if you're basically fighting an uphill battle and you don't know that when you're doing it. And so as a result, you definitely need to basically do your homework before you begin this venture of how to incorporate multicultural issues or teach a diverse student body. One of the things that's important is this concept of priming the faculty, so that even if individually you've made a decision that you think there's a need to address certain issues in your problems that you give to your students, or in the assignments that you assign, or in the people that you use as characters, how do you address the people who are not in your classroom, so your colleagues? First thing I thought would be really to affirmatively discuss what you're doing. So don't keep your colleagues in the dark, and basically include them in what you hope to accomplish. Basically start out by having a dialogue with your colleagues, and then that way you can actually have this open-ended conversation, and therefore you're not left to assume that you're the only one doing something. And that can really be invigorating and inspiring to note that there may be others who actually agree with the things you've found important and decide to do. And just as with students, not communicating with your colleagues what you're doing or why you're doing it or what you think is important can also breed this resistance. And the idea that what you're doing is arbitrary or you haven't really thought out why you're doing it, it can basically percolate as a result. One of the things to consider also is that there's these different concerns depending on where you're where you are within the faculty. If you're in a legal writing department, it matters depending on whether it's a uniform type department or it's a more autonomous department structure. So if it's a situation where within the department there's a lack of uniformity in the sense that the different professors maybe use different topics, or they're allowed to use different books, and there's not necessarily consistency among different sections, one of the things is that you might not even think that you need to talk to your colleagues about, well, what you're doing and why, but the same reasons as before, talk to them just so that they're not left in the dark, and if someone else, another student or another colleague asks, then they can actually reinforce what you're doing by knowing that you're doing it. So you want to prime the colleagues in those departments by saying, here's what I'm doing, why, what do you think, get some input in that way. And then even if there is uniformity in the department, and so maybe individual professors don't necessarily feel like they have the power to incorporate multicultural concepts into their teaching, you can, at a department meeting or, with your colleagues still, really ask about where there's room for flexibility. Explain the objectives and goals that you hope to accomplish, ask for input from your colleagues, and how can we as a group, go into these multicultural issues. And then don't just stop there. Boldly go into the brave new world. Don't just discuss with your department colleagues, because one of the things you don't want to end up doing is isolating the department from the whole, the rest of the faculty. We know that the students will likely talk about your course or the courses and what's happening in the writing classroom with the substantial or the substantive, or the doctrinal faculty members. And so you want to include them in that discussion as well. And if anything, maybe talk about with the substantive topic, substantive professors that teach in the areas that you're including. So if you're including a sexual orientation issue in your writing classroom, maybe figure out it's on the faculty who might be in the area of constitutional law, or if they're a class on sexual orientation law, and actually incorporate that individual in the discussion as well. What to do when you get this overt resistance? So basically, why are you doing that? And you shouldn't be doing that problem. What happens when you hear that? The answer to that question, I find, really depends a lot on that initial thought that you put into it, the culture of the institution and the structure of your department. Because if you're in an institution that maybe isn't particularly friendly, as you've done your research and found out, to the idea of being a little bit more open in discussing multicultural issues, it might be really difficult to answer that question. So one of the things you might want to think about doing is, talk to other colleagues and continue to have the discussion and figure out, well, is there a way to, broach the let's include multicultural issues topic to the broader faculty and, begin to sort of fight the uphill battle, it might seem initially. Express your why, when you do actually have to answer that question and someone asks you, in terms not just of, I'm doing it because I think it's important, or I'm doing it because it's, out there in society and students are going to have to see it, but express it in terms of student outcomes, the beyond the bar exam goals. What is it that you hope the students will get from this experience? And if you really, I find that if you focus on what the students will get out of the experience and out of the educational materials you're using, you'll tend to have a little bit less resistance from your colleagues. And the last thing I'd say on this point is really just don't give up. It's not necessarily the easiest thing to do, to do something different. But really, I think the first step is sort of recognizing, that there's something different to be done, and start with your colleagues and work that way. So in the sense that maybe faculty might be a little bit resistant, or maybe just not aware that you're doing something different, really just have an open conversation with your colleagues, and that might be the first step to decreasing that resistance. Kim is going to pick up with how to address student resistance on similar issues.
And before I do that, I just wanted to add a couple of thoughts to what Joanna's already said about promoting, inclusion and inclusive practices to other faculty. And I really, can't agree more with what Joanna said about, knowing the political arena of the law school where you teach, because as we know, all politics is local, right? So you have to be really savvy in terms of sorting out what the different issues might be on your particular faculty when it comes to promoting inclusion. And so I just wanted to share a little bit about my perspective at John Marshall. We're in a director-led program, but we have autonomous faculty, and we're all individually sort of choosing materials and structuring our courses and things like that. So that makes that, what that means is, comparisons among the different legal writing classes are inevitable. And so, there will be talk, right, amongst the students and amongst the faculty about what you might be doing that might be perceived as different. Another point that I wanted to share is, or maybe suggest, is that maybe one really concrete way of promoting inclusive curricular practices to other faculty is simply to just share resources, right? If you've developed any exercises or memo problems that might be useful in accomplishing these goals, sharing them. I think there might be one reason why there might be resistance from other faculty members is just that they just may not feel like they know how to do some of this diversity and multicultural work. And to the extent that you can share materials that you've already developed, I think is really helpful. And again, I want to just sort of recall what Linda said at the beginning of the webinar, which is that there might be folks in the audience who are thinking, it's very hard for me to participate in this diversity work because I may not view myself as a member of any kind of, minority group or whatnot. So I think that, talking about this subject is important, and important also because for those of us who do consider ourselves or are identified by others as being part of minority groups, I want to say that diversity work shouldn't be, and it isn't just like people of color work or minority group people work. I think that developing the faculty buy-in is important to promote that idea, as well as sort of supporting you or us as faculty members in the face of student resistance. And I guess that's what I'm going to talk about now. So I kind of just want to begin with a war story about my sort of own teaching. And so this war story begins about 2 years ago in the first, or actually 3 years ago, during the first legal writing class that I taught at John Marshall. My third and final open research memo I had crafted around this issue of a charitable property tax exemption, which, I guess many students did not feel very excited about. It's sort of like a dry, a boring topic to them. And, really, this example that I'm raising has nothing to do with the types of diversity issues that we've been discussing so far. It was, this is sort of this neutral idea that why is she giving this boring problem? And so I realized because of that experience that, you're going to get student resistance no matter what you do in the classroom. If they perceive something as boring, for example, then you're going to get some resistance. And I realized, because I'm using this memo problem again this semester, that being proactive in terms of priming the students and framing the issues is a really key element of dealing with student resistance. So knowing that there might be a little bit of resistance as to this, this boring property tax exemption problem, I spent the class where I distributed the memo problem talking about why this particular issue was so timely, so current in the context of, the economic recession and municipalities and states trying to generate revenue from wherever they can to support, the different government projects, et cetera, and how this is being currently litigated and things like that. So I think that having anticipated student resistance in this regard, I was able to sort of, be proactive in making sure that any concerns they have about this problem being boring were addressed right at the very beginning. And I think that this proactive approach is probably something that when it comes to problems that might be a little bit more, easier targets, because they explicitly take up controversial subjects such as race or ethnicity or sexual orientation, then, you can incorporate this kind of tactic, this strategy as well, right? Being proactive in framing the issue, priming your students, and in a couple of different ways, one of which is to include your goals in your syllabus from the outset, direct students to this portion of your syllabus, and also explicitly in class to sort of reinforce the ideas about, why you're doing certain things, whether it's, this boring memo problem or what can be perceived as this boring memo problem, or why you're engaging them in a discussion of some other controversial sort of legal issue that might be controversial not so much because of the legal issue, but because of the cast of characters who might be involved in it, because of the sort of social or cultural controversies that might be associated with a particular problem, let's say in constitutional law or immigration law or even criminal law, something like that. Yes, thank you, Joanna. In talking about all of this stuff and in talking about student resistance and some of the ways to maybe avoid student resistance, I think that when Joanna and I were talking about this, we both agreed that there's no real reason to go overboard in terms of incorporating multicultural curriculum into your classroom. It doesn't have to be that you feel that every single one of your assignments has to explicitly tackle these issues, because that might in and of itself, if the perception is there from the students that you have this sort of political agenda, then that might be one of the sources for student resistance. And so I think that knowing your audience, knowing who your students are, is a critical part of this calculus about the tactics and the strategies that you might use to deal with student resistance. And consider not just, sort of the demographic makeup of your student body, not just who they look like, but also other things. For example, language barriers and backgrounds, different statuses that may not be perceptible, sort of visibly, such as sexual orientation and class differences, life experiences, for example. I think this is really sort of key to keeping in mind as you craft a syllabus that explicitly takes into consideration diversity and multicultural topics. And one way of doing this, getting to know who your audience is, getting to know who your students are, is maybe begin a discussion during your first class. To talk about to try to figure out who your students are. And, I think many of us do this already by just doing sort of the first day icebreaker, talking about who you are, what undergraduate major you have, maybe what kind of graduate degrees you might have, and, that sort of open-ended question about who, why you come to law school. What I like to do in my first class is talk about, your favorite fictional lawyer. And, I'm getting the sense more and more, especially as I'm separating more and more from my students these days. I'm getting a little bit of a sense more about what their cultural backgrounds are. In a simple way, for example, last semester when I asked for favorite fictional lawyer, only one of my students said Claire Huxtable, the sort of matriarch on the Cosby Show. And believe it or not, there weren't a lot of people in the classroom who really knew who Claire Huxtable was, which was a little bit shocking and surprising to me. But it's sort of, one of those insights in terms of who your students are and sort of, what background they might be coming from, what their range of cultural literacy might be. So that was just a slight digression. But I think being sensitive to who your class is will lead you to being sensitive about the choices you make. In terms of, selecting materials for the course. One thing that I think is key to recall in this regard is avoiding what we might call the bias trap. Thinking that discussions of diversity and multiculturalism always have to equate to addressing issues like criminal law or immigration or poverty or discrimination. That's not always the case. I think when we get to the how-to, the mechanics of incorporating diversity, we'll talk about, both Joanna and I will talk about more simple or direct ways to get there. So why don't I turn that over now to Joanna.
Sure, thank you. So ways to incorporate diversity and cultural issues into the course. I've done some research on this and basically noticed that there's basically two things that are going on here. You have students who are from different backgrounds, and so there might be something called educating students from multicultural backgrounds. And then how do we educate all students on multicultural topics? So regardless of what your student body looks like or demographically and life experience is, what does that also mean? So what does this, what does this whole thing mean? Basically, educators, we need to reach out to our students from those diverse racial, ethnic, social class, cultural groups and ensure that they have equal educational opportunities and access to learning. And what we really need to do here is to basically use diverse materials so that there's some familiarity from the student standpoint with what you're using. So if students are from a particular background, that they'll sort of feel a little bit more comfortable if you include areas from their backgrounds in the materials you're using. One of the other things to do is to use diverse and varied teaching styles and be cognizant of different learning styles, that not everyone has the same life experience or background, and therefore they don't all come to the table and to the classroom with the same styles of learning. It's also being, aware of your institutional barriers. And a lot of this sort of overlaps with the faculty resistance, institutional resistance stuff, is that really, being aware of where you're teaching and actively addressing those issues in your classroom. So I'm just skipping through some of this. It's a little bit repetitive what we've sort of basically already said, and getting right into some of the, why the legal writing classroom. So the article that I wrote specifically sort of talked about, well, the need to do multicultural education, and then the need to, really focus in on legal writing classroom. I sort of delved into, well, the whole curriculum in, in law school, and talked about, well, generally in the non-skills type courses, there's not necessarily, necessarily time to really get into this sort of integrated discussion about these issues, multicultural issues or diversity issues, or, characters that are different. And that's in part because, the focus is really maybe on the substance and the, learning whatever law it is they're trying to teach the students. And also maybe because the classroom enrollment is much higher, and so it's a little bit more difficult to have one-on-one or small group conversations and really confront the issues head-on. And so classroom size absolutely matters. And I think in smaller classes, one of the things that the legal writing classroom tends to bring is this small, community where the students are, more trusting of the professor, more trusting of each other, and they build this confidence in being able to speak up and express, how they feel about a particular issue. And you can really have a, really meaningful discussion about some of the issues that come up that way. As far as legal writing, needing maximum opportunity to reach the students. One of the things that's also problematic is there's definitely quite a few elective courses that address this stuff that we generally and traditionally think of as multicultural topics. But then that requires that the students, on their own actually choose to take those courses. And if they're not required, well, especially with a lot of schools having a very high number of required credits to graduate, it's much more difficult to actually get students to be exposed to the materials, and so having them all have that multicultural experience. And so as a result, the legal writing classroom is much more ideal because of the fact that it's required, and small curriculums and small class sizes, usually involving a finite number of problems that can really get into this discussion. The students really have an opportunity to think critically about not only the issues you choose, but also the characters you select to play those different roles. The other thing in my research, I really focused in on this individual, Paul Gorski, and he does research in the area of multicultural education. And Gorski has these 5 goals, and it's not focusing on law schools at all, just sort of generally in education. There's 5 goals that he thinks are crucial and key, sorry, to basically being able to multiculturalize, so to speak, the educational experience. And so I've adopted those 5 goals, and just an overview, they are basically, instead of having a teacher-centered teaching experience, have a student-centered teaching experience. The second would be to explicitly choose a diverse curriculum, followed by including educational materials and media, again, explicitly having a supportive classroom and institution, and continually evaluating, assessing, and changing what you do to make sure that you're actually meeting the needs and the goals and objectives that you set out at the outset. Focusing back on student-centered teaching, the learning in the classroom should be active learning, interactive learning, engaging learning. This tends to be more the case, especially in the writing classroom, since it's a small group. But definitely, I've sat in and I've taught writing classrooms where sometimes the students, especially those ones really early in the morning before they've had their coffee, they're sometimes not as engaged as we want them to be. And really figuring out ways to engage the students in a dialogue and get them talking. And one of the things I realized was that in the doctrinal classes, a lot of professors and most professors really subscribe to the Socratic method. But in the legal writing classroom, we don't necessarily always use that. Actively calling on the students, actively asking them, what do you think about this case? What do you think about this problem? What do you think about the client situation here? And getting them to really thinking, critically thinking about what they're doing and what they're writing about. and not just the writing side, but the issues that we're having them address. So I think that we can sort of use the Socratic method a little bit more in the writing classroom to invoke a little bit of thought and encourage the students to think and discuss material with us. More on top of that, you want to basically support student activities and role play exercises. So maybe instead of just using fact scenarios where you give the students the facts, maybe have them actually engage in, skit, to present the facts as a role play, and actually get them engaged in it that way. And you really can get students invested in the materials a lot more when they, they take it on as, like a personal thing. Again, here, emphasize critical and creative thinking, not so much test taking. And I guess these are things that are really beneficial and drive home a lot, and that are driven home a lot more in the legal writing classroom, because as opposed to tests in the doctrinal classes, we're really more focusing on communicating and authentic assessments, where we actually have the students critically thinking about an issue and writing about an issue, as opposed to just reciting a bunch of rules back to us. And all of these things really tend to support the idea of how to incorporate multicultural stuff. Well, specifically addressing, nail on the head, incorporating topics from a range of characters and experiences. So one of the things that in Kim's handout, which she'll talk about in a little while, she actually talks about not just using issues that are multicultural, but maybe people. So in her the charitable property tax exemption memo, use actual individuals that are diverse, as opposed to maybe having the legal issue be something that's diverse. And so there's more ways, than one to broaden the curriculum in that way. And, of course, include your students. And, Kim said at the beginning, well, ask them at the beginning of the class, well, what are their experiences? And actually use that as a tool to figure out maybe what you can delve into that they haven't experienced as of yet. As far as including educational media materials goes, so not just, you don't want to be the only talking head. It's sort of when we think about when we try to talk about career services issues, and we bring in people from career services, or we bring in practitioners in the field to talk to the students about, why legal writing is important. Well, the same thing goes with diverse and multicultural topics. You don't want the students to get the feel that it's your agenda, or that it's, you're the only person who subscribes to this, or a need for it. Really bringing in guest lecturers, or having the students, engage in field experiences, having them maybe, do interviews with people, really having them discuss and engage in research on societal differences and current events. All of that really helps broaden and validate the need to recognize that there is, work to be done in this area, and that there are multicultural issues, and that there's need to actually address those. And it also will help to sort of minimize the student resistance that you might have faced when they get input on these issues from various sources. All right. The rest of this, sort of your supportive classroom and institution, really just be cognizant of your own internal biases, recognizing that, you might come into the table or into the classroom with your own, your own biases, your own baggage, and, really overtly and actively trying to eradicate those. And I, I use the term here, micro-iniquities, basically things that don't necessarily seem to be all that bad, but they can make students feel uncomfortable, and can kind of breed that resistance and sensitivity issue. So a lot of this is like crossed over into each other. And then, of course, make sure that whatever you do, at the end of the semester, look back and say, well, what worked, what didn't? Was there a lot of resistance to that topic I picked? Why was there resistance to that topic? Was there maybe, the students really take well to a particular problem that you used, and, figure out what worked and what didn't, and then recycle what worked and change what didn't, so that you're constantly thinking about this material. I just wanted to kind of point out two quick examples of institutional commitment. There's two schools that have done this differently. One, Northeastern University School of Law, has basically, on a group, faculty-wide level, has agreed upon the need to use multicultural issues and actually teach that way. And so the writing program there is actually functions like a law office, and it's linked up with one of the clinics downtown, and they actually, have the students work on actual cases. And that definitely, not only kind of meets this pro bono sort of aspect, but also brings students into the, from the first year right in, the benefits of actually learning about multicultural issues so that they can actually represent those individuals when they graduate. And that's what I call the using multicultural issues directly. Another situation where an HBCU recognized the need to actually educate their diverse student body. Well, they recognize that the students maybe might come to the law school with what we already traditionally, the bias trap, think of as multicultural topics, but maybe they need training in small business or business, skills and whatnot. And so there, they've actually linked up with Small Business Technology and Development Center, and they've brought in multicultural issues in that sense, by educating their diverse student body about the other types of things that we wouldn't necessarily traditionally think of as being, having a need to actually broach. Let's see, I'm just going to skip to Kim. And one of the things Kim's going to kind of briefly talk about as we sort of wrap up our presentation are two tools out there for you guys in the community to use. One would be the fake name generator, and the other would be her handout that she created, directly addressing ways that legal writing professors can actually integrate these materials and diversity issues into their classroom. So with that, Kim.
Yes, and very quickly, just the fake name generator is this web-based tool to help you develop, names, a cast of characters. And you can see from the screenshot there that you can choose gender, and also you can sort of choose like race, ethnicity, and you get 20 different choices. And all of this information, or some of the information that Joanna and I have been talking about, you can also find on the handout that I compiled in with the help of the folks from the LWI Diversity Initiatives Committee, and there's the link to that handout.
So it sounds like maybe we're ready for some questions.
Yes, sure.
Okay.
Yep.
We actually have gotten some questions from some of the participants. So if the way this works is I'll just try to shoot them off to our presenters and let you folks tackle just a couple of these. And we probably only have time for just a couple. One of the first questions that I think would make sense to address is whether you can actually address this issue by simply being sensitive to the use of names or in your problems and in your materials, or should you be more explicit about framing a problem, say, that involves something like hate speech or something like that? Is it okay, are we at least making some headway by simply being sensitive to names?
So I guess I'll take that. I think that, there, like we discussed, there are various ways to approach incorporating diversity into your classroom. And, one of the ways that I suggested is, maybe just think about who participates as a part of your problem, right? So Joanna says, in my charitable property tax exemption memo, for example, there's no sort of overt diversity issue in terms of race or gender or anything like that, but my characters, beginning with the name of the assigning partner, or the partner who assigns the case to the students, is a woman. Now, this woman's name happens to be Chris Cotter. So the question, there are all sorts of conversations you can have about, well, why do we make the assumption that Chris Cotter is a man, and things like that. I think when it comes to really shifting grounds and making diversity, hate speech, for example, the central legal issue for discussion, I think obviously, well, at least from my perspective, you need to be a little bit more considerate in the types of framing in terms of facts and even language that you might use in a kind of problem like that, which is not to say that you should pull any punches. There's been a lot of talk on the legal writing listserv about language and how we incorporate language and stuff into our problems. And I would think with something like hate speech, you're going to have to use certain words. I mean, that's the whole problem with hate speech, right? And you can't sort of shy away from that. I think you need to really confront it head on.
And I would agree with that wholeheartedly.
Okay, let me follow it up with another question that came in as well, and that's how do you balance the desire to be inclusive and potentially generate some of these discussions with the, as this person said, hitting someone over the head approach that seems to indicate that you have some sort of agenda.
Joanna,
I'll take that one. What I would suggest there would be, I think in terms of like in your syllabus or even from the first day of class, overtly discussing with the students, here's what we're going to address, and really explain to them what you hope to accomplish, like your, the goals and the student outcomes and the, the learning experience you hope that they will gain from a particular problem you're using. That I think if you explain to the students that listen, it's not in a particular agenda, that there's a purpose for this, either that it's the quote boring problem, but the diverse people, the diverse characters in it, and that you're trying to broaden their experience that way. Not so much versus not saying anything and then having them not know why we're using this problem or why we're using these characters, or why couldn't she or he, the professor, have picked characters with easier names to pronounce or something like that. Basically, I think the more open you are with the students in discussing it, I think the less you're likely to fall into the trap of them believing that it's your agenda. And as far as the other half of that question, which could you remind me really quickly?
Sure. It's sort of a question about balancing being inclusive with having an agenda, and you may have already addressed that.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I mean, basically, just I would just say be as clear and transparent in the same way we talk about grading rubrics and being clear and transparent there. Be clear and transparent with why you chose the problems you chose, and I think that'll help balance out the concerns the individual had.
Okay. We had a couple of other questions, but I'm looking at the time and realizing that many of them overlap what those two, at least what the responses to those two questions probably addressed. So I think I'm going to ask if we can wrap things up at this point. We want to try to end on time, and it's just turning to 1 o'clock. So I want to thank our presenters and thank our panelists. Thank you very much for this important topic. I know that we're just touching on it, and I know that there's plenty more that we can talk about with this issue. I encourage everyone to have those conversations not only with your colleagues, but with us through the listserv and at conferences, and know that we're not, that other people are out there thinking about this as well. So Joanna and Kim, thank you both for being with us. And Jason, do you have anything that you need to say for this?
I want to also echo your thanks and thank Kim and Joanna for being with us, and thank you, Linda, for being our moderator today. And to our attendees, please, as you sign off, you'll see a short 2-question survey from us for your feedback. We'd appreciate you quickly taking that survey. Any thoughts or suggestions are appreciated, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you all very much, and have a good afternoon.